For 37 years, I believed our marriage ran on numbers, routines, and Bruce's steady key turn at the bank every Tuesday at 2 p.m. My name is Nadine Harper, 66 years old, former librarian of the quiet coastal town of Pinecrest Valley. When you live a disciplined life with a forensic accountant, you learn to measure time in patterns, not surprises. Our bills were paid early. Our taxes were filed ahead of deadlines. Retirement, he always said, was secured. I never imagined that the safest-looking systems can hide the deepest breaches. This chapter begins with the one object that carried our entire mythology, the blue ledger he never wanted me to question. We bought our first home together in 1988, a modest white bungalow 2 blocks from the tide pools. Bruce placed a leather-bound notebook in the center of the dining table a week into our marriage. He embossed the first line Harper Household Ledger in tidy block letters. Then, using his favorite steel straightedge, he drew a clean dividing line across the page. 2 columns, assets and liabilities. He worked for Pacific Ridge Forensic Partners. The company chased hidden transactions, questioned signatures, reconstructed fraud trails. Yet inside our house, Bruce never interrogated a mystery. He created one. He flipped pages with reverence. He logged every certainty: the $1,280 mortgage payment, the $7,450 porch, repair the $3,900 preschool tuition for our only granddaughter, Melody. Each entry carried a timestamp and a notation. Each notation was guarded by his steady mantra. It sounded like competence. It felt like faith. I was not a numbers person. I was the keeper of stories, the curator of Dewey Decimals, the gentle voice guiding teenagers toward biographies and single mothers toward community reading lists. Bruce was the keeper of certainty. We balanced each other, or so I trusted. When I once joked that he should have worked for the tax archives instead of the mystery files, Bruce only paused. He tilted his glasses down his nose, gave me a half-smile that was technical, not tender, and said, "Tidiness is protection. Nadine, curiosity is for other people's cases." I laughed. He did not. That I later understood was the sign I missed. His systems were airtight, but the ownership was singularly his. He locked the drawer where the blue ledger lived inside his oak filing cabinet's second drawer down brass key, permanently on his keyring. I never held it. I never touched the drawer. My trust was my signature. The lock was his. Bruce believed discipline was identity. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m. without fail, he went to the bank. Through rainstorms that rattled the porch roof like a testament, through the flu season that left our windows fogged through birthdays, graduations and anniversaries, he never missed it. I would ask every few years, "Why Tuesday?" He would touch my forehead, lightly kiss my hand, and reply the same. It compounded yes, into distance, not safety. I built a library career around human instinct. Bruce built a household around repetitive certainty. His world fit in columns, by hour, by minute. No exclamation points, no ambiguity. My world fit in chapters, edges softened by empathy. Our children learned both languages. My son, Austin Harper, 42, an engineer who designs structural load maps for mountain bridges. He reads blueprints like Bruce reads transactions. "Nadine, my daughter, you don't have to fight every puzzle on your own," he used to say. Then there was my daughter, Delilah Reed, 38, a community nurse who feels emotions before motions. She hugs before archives. Read numbers, read stories. Read resilience, but always anchored in slice-of-life instinct. And then there was Melody, 7 years old, fluent in both. Columns in her toy finance register, stories in her notebook margins. She was the glue that made us a household, not just a system. Bruce logged Melody's preschool payments, but never told me the story behind the numbers. He never said we were drowning because the ledger always looked tidy. The tidiness was a mask I never needed to lift, because I believed masks were for outsiders, not my husband. But masks can be durably, ASCII, unremarkable, invisible, until the breach becomes personal. When Bruce first showed his forensic talent, it was in a neighbor's crisis. A scam caller tried to trick Mrs. Caldwell, an older widow across the street, into giving up her account details. Bruce took a legal pad, recorded the call, traced the routing number, alerted the bank, locked her accounts faster than the scam could splash across her savings. We all hailed him quietly afterward. The Caldwell case became dinner conversation in the community. Bruce was the quiet hero of paperwork, the one who saw patterns and moved before panic printed bruises on livelihoods. So I admired the systems. I never admired the silence. I assumed that his ritual to Republic Union Bank was a continuation of that protective competence. He was securing accounts, rotating filings, checking on interest compounding, maybe calibrating CDs, treasury indexes, or lining up statements for future forensic revelations I never needed to hear. I never suspected that the man who protected outsiders in the community could later hurt the insiders. In my name, behind my stillness. Without confiding the stage of drowning he was scripting. I look back now and see it like camera footage in my mind. The rain beating on the porch roof at 2:00 p.m., his boots drying on the mat, his keys clinking once in his hand, as if the vault light itself bowed to him. Spots of ink columns drawn so straight they could slice belief into obedience. That blue ledger was never a journal. It was authority. After 37 years, I understand the first chapter was never about financial triumph, but about narrative ownership. He turned time into a pattern. He turned protection into isolation. He turned certainty into a cage that looked exactly like care. And I let it stand unopened because I thought love meant trusting the keeper of numbers. My life used to move in predictable stacks like library shelves, aligned by height. This chapter begins at 9:12 a.m., sharp cold, ordinary a morning, split by a phone call. The rain tapped on the pavement exactly the way November rain usually does. The air blew sharp smelt of pine and ocean salt. Pinecrest Valley was sleepy on fall mornings. Bruce left that morning with the quiet certainty of a man built from calendars. He put on a graphite suit, ironed the night before, perfect creases. He grabbed his leather brief bag and closed the door with a single click. I was at Mapleton Grocer's Market picking avocados. I was also choosing produce for a recipe I never made, yet kept selecting. I reached for the produce aisle's blue HUD label, Fresh Fives, today only. The store placed produce under code names instead of stories. My phone buzzed in my coat at the same moment a raindrop hit the grocery bag. That sound will live in my memory forever. Austin, I asked. He never called this early. He never broke schedule. I could hear static, then a careful inhale. He said, "Mom, you need to come to the hospital." Dad collapsed at work. His voice was flat, afraid. I froze between the produce columns. Bruce was at the audit firm lunch table. The doctor had told Austin severe heart rupture. Instant. No warning. The phrase sounded like forensic jargon. I checked out my produce items at 9:14 a.m., the store's timestamp. The weight code mattered then, not pages. I thanked the teller, picked up my canvas produce tote, and walked out under the cold autumn sky. I didn't call Bruce. He didn't like noise or interruptions, even tender ones. I walked anyway. I got into my sedan, wiped rain from the steering wheel, looked ahead, and felt the first fracture forming. The hospital was Bayfront Memorial Hospital, a glass building hugging the coastline. Austin met me at the sliding doors. His eyes were rimmed red, but he kept breathing like he was holding words in escrow. He said, "By the time I got there, Dad was already gone. His tie was wet from rain, not tears." I swallowed. Nodded, carried a small grief compact like receipts, but not a full account collapse. I looked up at the hallway. Light said nothing interruptive. Silence is sometimes a column of its own. The doctor said he probably didn't feel much. Quick clean the way Bruce might have chosen if life had provided him a footnote key. I didn't know where relief came from. I felt air move past the ribs he'd never talked about. Everyone at the funeral kept whispering interpretations of widow shock like it was a diagnosis. I held my posture straight and filed no reaction. At the funeral, I saw my son, Rachel Reed, 38 community nurse, sitting in pew 2. Her posture said realism, but her ethics had never been audited by Bruce. Next to her sat Ruth's Book Haven, not an actual funeral ally, but the name of the bookstore that would later save what Bruce couldn't. The wind picked up at 9:12 a.m. that day. Everything looked ordinary until it split. My son, David Harper, 40. Former investment banker, came over with careful footing. His shoes were leather polished, but his instincts read like account divergences. He pulled a folder from his trunk. Manila-colored, thick, cold logic. I remember the folder's label, Rub Summary. The envelope inside the folder said, Void if complicit. Bruce had never archived subtlety. Bruce archived precision. I archived trust until the columns split in sound. David tapped the folder and said softly, Finances don't add up. My spine filed a chill I recognized. Precise, crisp, cool. I looked away from the pew and heard the ocean hit the shore outside the funeral room window, steady and unfeeling. The lies were. The following Monday, I met legal ally Ruth Caldwell, 72 bookstore owner, former journalist with sharp eyes that read truths like front-page cliffhangers. I said, without faltering, I need a lawyer to handle financial fraud. She nodded like she was seeing a headline form. Emily Harper, 35, tech-savvy paralegal. Another ally, always crucial. She was the one who found bank routing anomalies when no one believed me at first because she believed patterns more than personas. She gave me the card for North Harbor Community Bank, where I would eventually reclaim my identity via complexity, not shock. 3 days after the funeral, the mail arrived with the dull rhythm of rain on the porch. Bills, catalogs, sympathy cards, all stacked in neutral paper. On top of the pile lay a plain white envelope. No handwriting, no return address, just my name printed in machine ink. I turned it over twice before opening it. The paper felt colder than the air. Inside was a single letter from Republic Union Bank. Dear Mrs. Harper, we wish to express our condolences regarding your husband's passing. Per the terms of Safe Deposit Box Lease 618, you are listed as the secondary holder. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to arrange access. I read the words again. Box 618, secondary holder. I blinked as if the numbers would rearrange into something familiar. We never had a safe deposit box. At least that was what I thought. The house was too quiet. The tick of the kitchen clock sounded like a metronome set for anxiety. I sat at the table with the letter flat before me. 37 years of marriage, and this was the first I had ever heard of a locked box in his name. I whispered into the air, Why Bruce? What could you possibly need to hide? Outside, the wind lifted a curtain corner, letting in a stripe of gray light. The ledger still sat in its drawer upstairs, untouched since the day he died. A record of everything he wanted me to see and nothing he didn't. The envelope in front of me was an invitation into the part he'd sealed away. At 2:00 p.m., his old ritual hour, I dialed the number printed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered with a careful, trained warmth. Republic Union Bank. This is Patricia speaking. How may I help you? This is Nadine Harper, I said. I received a letter about a safe deposit box, number 618. Her tone shifted from polite to professional. Yes, Mrs. Harper, I see it here. The lease is current through December. You're listed as the co-holder. Would Thursday at 10 work for your access appointment? Yes, I said automatically. When the call ended, I stayed seated listening to the steady breath of the refrigerator motor. The house had rhythm again, but it was mechanical, not human. Wednesday evening, my son stopped by. The headlights cut across the living room wall before the knock came. Mom Austin's voice was soft. He carried a folder under his arm. I noticed his tie had been loosened, his collar wrinkled from the day. He sat where his father used to sit at the head of the table. The chair creaked the same way it always had. I've been going through Dad's office files, he said. There are things that don't add up. What kind of things? He opened the folder. Inside were statements from different accounts, 3 checking accounts each under Bruce's name. One empty for months, one closed, one holding $43. That can't be right, I said. Our joint account should have more than that. His expression told me everything before the words came. "Mom, the retirement accounts are missing too. I can't find them anywhere." My chest tightened. He wouldn't do that. "I hope you're right," Austin said quietly, "but I think you should be careful with whatever's in that box." That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind pushed against the house as if testing its structure. Every sound carried a question mark. I replayed Bruce's routines in my head: Tuesday bank visits, late-night desk lamp glows, the ledger's neat columns, his steady phrase, "keeping our tomorrow tidy." Had he been hiding a storm under those words all along, I thought of the white envelope. It sat on the nightstand like a small ghost. Thursday arrived cold and colorless. I woke before dawn dressed in a navy blazer and gray slacks armor, not morning. I made coffee but didn't drink it. At 9:30, I drove downtown. The wipers brushed away a misting rain. The Republic Union Bank rose ahead, all glass and steel. The building looked new, efficient, faceless. Inside, the lighting hummed softly. Patricia met me near the reception desk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the posture of someone who'd learned to keep other people's secrets. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. Mr. Harper was a valued client. Her words landed with weight I couldn't feel. She led me down a hallway lined with small metal doors, each the size of a buried confession. Box 618 was halfway down. She used 2 keys, hers and mine, to unlock it, then slid the drawer free. "I'll give you privacy," she said, nodding toward a small room with a table and chair. "Thank you." The box was heavier than I expected. I set it on the table, the metal cold beneath my fingers. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. It wasn't grief I felt, it was dread disguised as curiosity. I lifted the lid. Inside were several folders neatly stacked, labeled in Bruce's handwriting. The first one read, "Investments. Actual." I opened it. Page after page of statements. Losses, failed ventures, risky stock trades, hundreds of thousands gone, all under his name alone. The second folder was worse. Home equity loans. 3 of them totaling $270,000. Each document bore his signature. The collateral was our home. The house I had painted 3 times. The house where I had raised our children. I couldn't breathe. The third folder made my hands tremble. Credit accounts. Margaret Harper. I frowned. My name isn't Margaret. It's Nadine. But the Social Security number was mine. The signature was forged. 15 credit cards, all maxed out. $96,000 in debt. He had used my identity. Bruce, the man who once taught students at the community center how to recognize fraud, had committed it with my name. At the bottom of the box lay an envelope, cream-colored thick, sealed with his handwriting. Nadine. I opened it with steady hands. His words were measured precise, like every report he'd ever written. "If you're reading this, I'm gone." I tried to fix what I broke. 5 years ago, I made an investment I thought would save us. It failed. Every Tuesday, I went to the bank trying to repair it, but the hole grew deeper. The loans, the cards, the forged signatures, I did them to buy time. I thought I could fix it before you found out. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I love you. I always did. I read it twice. Then a third time. Each reading stripped the sentence of apology and left only the math of destruction. I folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and set it on the stack. When I walked out of that room, my hands were cold, but my spine was straight. Patricia waited near the door. "Are you all right, Mrs. Harper?" "No," I said. "But I will be. I need copies of everything in that box and the name of a lawyer who handles financial fraud." Her eyes widened, then softened. "I'll make the copies myself." Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like rust and salt. For the first time in 37 years, I didn't know what our future looked like. But I knew one thing. It would no longer be hidden in a box. 3 days after the funeral, the mail arrived late. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that metallic chill that follows sorrow. I walked to the porch past Bruce's boots still lined by the door. They hadn't moved since the day he left for work. Among bills and sympathy cards, one envelope stood out. Plain white. No return address. Just my name typed cleanly in black ink. Mrs. Nadine Harper. The paper felt cold in my hands, like it had traveled through a machine instead of human touch. I tore it open with my thumb. Inside, a single page printed on the letterhead of Republic Union Bank. Dear Mrs. Harper, we extend our condolences for your recent loss. As the secondary holder of Safe Deposit Box number 618, you are entitled to access per the current lease agreement. Please contact our office to schedule an appointment at your convenience. I read it twice, then a third time. Safe Deposit Box number 618, secondary holder. For 37 years of marriage, I had never heard of any box. Bruce handled every statement, every account, every line item of our life. He filed papers with a precision that looked like love. Now there was a hidden vault, a numbered secret he never mentioned. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter. The sunlight through the window was sharp and colorless. On the table sat his coffee mug, still faintly stained along the rim. I used to wash it last because it always felt like an ending. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Even the clock seemed to tick softer. I whispered aloud, almost to the air, "Why didn't you tell me, Bruce?" No answer, only the rustle of paper. That afternoon, I called the number printed at the bottom of the letter. My hands trembled slightly as I held the phone. A woman's voice answered, polite, professional, steady. Republic Union Bank. This is Patricia. How may I help you? My name is Nadine Harper. I received a letter about a safe deposit box, number 618. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing. Yes, Mrs. Harper, you are listed as the secondary holder on that box. I am so sorry for your loss. Would Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you to access it? Thursday, 2 days away. I agreed before I had time to think. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet again. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the microwave door. My face looked like a photograph that had been overexposed. I thought about the ledger, the drawer, the rituals. The man who had built a life of perfect order had left behind something I was never meant to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the house and the beams creaked like old bones. I lay awake, eyes tracing the ceiling shadows, wondering what waited behind a small metal door labeled 618. Was it another ledger insurance papers? A letter of apology? Or something worse, proof that the order he worshipped had finally consumed the man himself? I remembered the last conversation we had before he died. He was folding his gray suit jacket, checking his wristwatch, saying, "Back by 5. I told him to take a scarf. The weather was turning. He smiled, faintly distracted, already somewhere else in his mind. Now that moment felt staged, like he'd been closing a scene I didn't know was ending. Wednesday passed in a blur. Austin stopped by in the evening. His tie hung loose, his face drawn from long hours at the firm. "Mom," he said softly, "how are you holding up? I'm fine." The words felt automatic. He looked around the kitchen. His father's files still stacked neatly by the desk. "You should rest. Let me handle things for a while." I hesitated, then handed him the letter. He read it carefully, his brows narrowing. "Did you know about this box?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. But if Dad had one, there must be records somewhere. I'll check his office files tomorrow." "Don't," I said quickly. "Let me see it first." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But call me afterward." Thursday morning came cold and gray. I dressed slowly, choosing my navy blazer and pressed slacks, not morning clothes, armor. I tied my hair back, slipped the letter into my purse, and left the house at 9:30. The Republic Union Bank building stood at the edge of downtown, glass and steel, polished and sterile. I had passed it countless times but never gone inside. A woman in her 50s greeted me near the entrance. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Patricia." We spoke on the phone. Her tone was gentle but efficient, the practiced sympathy of someone who had repeated condolences all week. She led me through a hallway lined with framed photos of former board members. Their smiles looked permanent, their eyes detached. At the end of the hall was a heavy steel door. Patricia used 2 keys, hers and the one she handed me. "This will unlock box 618. I'll give you privacy once it's open." I nodded. My pulse felt loud in my ears. Inside the vault, the walls gleamed silver. Hundreds of small numbered boxes stacked like metal teeth. Patricia inserted the first key, waited for mine, then turned them together. A click echoed faintly through the room. She stepped back. "Take your time." I carried the box to a small room with a single table and chair. It was heavier than I expected. I set it down and just stared at it. Plain metal. No warmth. No hint of what it held. For 37 years, Bruce had hidden this from me. All the while, he'd told me everything was secure, everything tidy. I ran a hand over the cold surface. The chill seeped into my skin. Then, with a slow breath, I lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of folders, thick and organized, labeled in Bruce's handwriting. His pen strokes were neat, unwavering, familiar enough to make my stomach twist. The first folder read, "Investments, Actual." I opened it. Page after page of statements. Losses, failed stocks, risky ventures, hundreds of thousands gone. I flipped to the next folder, Home Equity Loans. 3 separate loans, all in his name, against our home. Total $270. My breath caught. At the bottom was another folder, labeled Credit, Personal. Inside 15 credit cards, all in my name, my social security number, my forged signature, total balance $96,000. My knees went weak. I sank into the chair, the metal groaning under my weight. He had stolen my name. The man who kissed my forehead every Tuesday before his ritual bank trips had built a second life inside this box. At the very bottom lay a sealed envelope, cream-colored, my name written in Bruce's handwriting. I stared at it, hands trembling. The letter was waiting. And though I hadn't read a word yet, I already knew whatever warmth remained from 37 years of marriage would end inside that paper. I opened Bruce's letter in the same small vault room where I had found it. The door was shut. The air felt refrigerated and still. The metal table between my elbows was scratched with faint lines. People had sat here before me, opening other secrets, other lives. The cream envelope lay in my hands. His handwriting looked calm and familiar across the front. Nadine, not honey, not sweetheart. Just my name, centered like a file label on a drawer. For 37 years, Bruce had repeated the same 6 words whenever I asked about money. "Keeping our tomorrow tidy," you said. I heard myself whisper that sentence in the steel room. It bounced off the walls and came back wrong. I slid a finger under the flap and broke the seal. My hands did not shake. Grief had burned through me days earlier. What remained now was colder than grief. It felt like stepping into one of his cases, except I was the evidence. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting marched across the page in neat lines. No smudges, no rush strokes. "Nadine, if you are reading this, I'm already gone. It means you opened the box. I am sorry. I know those words are not enough. They sit cheap beside what I did. 5 years ago, I made an investment I was sure would fix everything. It failed and took most of our savings with it. I was ashamed. I thought I could work my way back. Every Tuesday, I went to the bank chasing another fix. I opened new accounts to juggle the old ones. I moved balances from one hole to another. I refinanced what should have stayed safe. I crossed lines I swore I would never cross. I told myself it was temporary just until I could repair the damage. I kept you in the dark because I told myself I was protecting you. You hate numbers. That is what I used as my excuse. Instead, I dragged us into deeper water. I tied weights to your name and called it protection. I have taken out home equity loans against the house. You did not sign them, even though the papers say you did. They are cross-collateralized. If one fails, the others follow. Total principal is $260,000. I opened credit in your name. 19 cards in total, 15 in yours, 4 in Rachel's. Your credit is ruined because of me. Hers will suffer too. I will not be here to fix it. There is almost nothing left in the accounts you know about. The retirement account you trusted is gone. For 6 months, our checking balance has hovered around $52. I kept it alive by shifting money between different holes. If they come for the house, they will say you benefited from the debt. Legally, you may be responsible for what you never touched. I did not do this because I stopped loving you. I did it because I was drowning and could not admit it. Drowning people grab whatever is closest, even the people they love. I grabbed your name when I should have reached for honesty. I see now what I have done to you and to our children. I know it is too late to undo it. I am not asking you to forgive me. I do not deserve it. I am only trying to leave you the truth. Talk to a lawyer you trust. Do not let anyone tell you this was your fault. You believe the man you married. That is not a crime. What I did is, Bruce. He had signed his name under that last word, the same flowing signature I had seen on taxes and birthday checks. I stared at it for a long moment. It looked like every other signature he had ever used. The difference now was context. It did not sit beneath a joke on a card or beside a mortgage payment. It sat under a confession. My own name appeared at the top of the page as the addressee, Mrs. Nadine Harper. It felt less like a greeting and more like a verdict. Keeping our tomorrow tidy, you said. I repeated the words quietly. This was what tidy looked like now. A retirement account drained to zero. A checking account pretending to live on $52. 19 credit cards opened with stolen consent. Home equity sliced into cross-collateral loans worth $260,000. For years, I had watched him walk into Republic Union Bank every Tuesday at 2. I pictured him neatly adjusting numbers in our favor. Instead, he had been patching leaks with my identity, turning my trust into collateral, turning our home into a chip on the table. My life had always felt organized into columns, income and expenses, love and routine. Now there was a third column that had no place in his ledger, betrayal. It did not roar or slam doors. It sat there heavy and precise, like an autopsy report. 6 words kept looping in my head. Not his this time, mine. You did not keep tomorrow tidy, Bruce. That thought scared me more than the numbers. It meant I was finally arguing with a man who could never answer back. Something inside my chest shifted. The numb space where grief had not landed began to fill. Anger rose first, hot and sharp. Then it cooled, settling into something harder than anger. Resolve. I did not tear the letter in half. I did not crumple it or spit out curses. Instead, I folded it along its original crease. I slid it back into the cream envelope like evidence into a file. He had left me a confession, not a solution. The box held proof, but no rescue plan. If this had been one of his forensic cases, he would have advised the client calmly. Gather every document. Keep copies. Call counsel. In the silence of that vault room, I realized that was exactly what I needed to do. Not as a wife begging for mercy, as the victim of a crime. I stacked the folders in order again. Investments, loans, credit, letter. Each one was a piece of a story he had tried to bury under numbers. I closed the metal box and felt its weight shift in my hands. It was not heavier than before. It just finally felt honest. When I stepped out into the hallway, Patricia was waiting near the door. Her face softened when she saw my expression. "Are you all right, Mrs. Harper?" she asked. The question hovered between us, fragile and sincere. "No," I said. My voice sounded steady, almost formal. "But I will be. I need copies of everything from Box 618 and the name of a good financial fraud lawyer." Her eyes widened, then she nodded once. "I will make the copies myself, and I do know someone you should call." I thanked her and walked through the lobby. The polished floor gleamed. The overhead lights suddenly felt too bright. Outside, the sky above Pinecrest Valley was a hard, pale blue. The ocean in the distance kept its usual rhythm, indifferent and steady. The world had not ended. It had simply rearranged its columns. 37 years of marriage now had a new ledger. Not the blue book Bruce kept locked, but the one I would build myself. And it would start with 6 words that echoed like an autopsy. Keeping our tomorrow tidy, you said. Now it was my tomorrow, my ledger, my case. I thought the coldest part of this story was the fraud. I was wrong. The coldest part was telling the truth to the people I expected to protect it. 3 days after I spread the statements on my kitchen table, I still heard the metal click of box 618 in my bones. I moved slowly like a person who needs to choose each breath before speaking. But the story was no longer just mine to carry alone. I called my children, not to ask permission, but to open the next scene with honesty. Austin arrived first. He stood in the doorway, jacket damp from an early winter drizzle, shoulders squared like someone bracing for impact. He carried his own folder, too, not for evidence against me, but for evidence he hoped could save his father's memory. Rachel came in behind him 5 minutes later. Her car tires still hissed on the street when the door clicked shut behind her. She walked in with makeup, perfect coat, cashmere, soft posture, steel calm, a daughter fluent in appearances but not prepared for collision. We sat in silence for 8 seconds. 8 seconds can be very loud when truth is uninvited. I opened safe deposit box 618, I said. My voice sounded calm, but calm is not the same as fine. Calm is the tone you use when you have nowhere left to hide. Rachel inhaled sharply. Her breath made a small sound, like paper pulled too fast from a printer. "What are you talking about?" she asked. She said it with doubt, first, fear, second, like she was checking my statement for authenticity. I placed the cream envelope on the table between us, the same envelope that held Bruce's confession. One object can anchor a plot point better than a raised voice ever could. I slid the letter toward her. "Read it," I said. "Read every page after." She opened the letter slowly. Her fingers were steady, but her eyes moved like someone speed-reading denial itself. "You really believe this?" she said, looking at me like I had rewritten history. "Dad would never do that. He loved you." I nodded once. "Yes, he did love us. He also stole our names. Both sentences are true." She shook her head faster now. "No, this has to be wrong. Maybe shock made you connect things that don't connect." I did not interrupt her unraveling. Unraveling is not action. It is a human reflex when the myth is more comfortable than the wound. But I said I saw the signatures. I paid for a lie I did not sign. Her silence hit harder than the words had. Rachel did not come alone in this phase of disbelief. The next morning, she convinced me to meet her legal contact, a person who could translate crime into court credibility into paperwork, Elena Marquez, 58 years old, senior lawyer specializing in identity theft, marital fraud, and internal banking crimes, a calm but cutting hero whose justice lives in timestamps and ink trails. We met her in a building surrounded by tall reeds and distant mountains, not ocean anymore. I had moved 2 months earlier to Pinecrest Valley, a quiet town tucked between cliffs and evergreen ridges. At the entrance of Republic Union Bank, the bank's architecture looked sterile, polished. Familiarity turned forensic. But this meeting was not about architecture or love or grief. It was about pattern recognition. Elena listened like someone reading a financial timeline without needing to flip pages. "Your father built systems," she said to Rachel, "and your mother is finally opening the system he controlled." Each sentence she spoke sat crisp like audit lines, no emotion, exotic markers, punctuation built for clarity. Then she said gently, "Denial is not evidence. Pain is not liability." Rachel folded her arms. She trusted Elena but not me, because Dad was the mythic anchor in her mind. "If the signatures are fake, prove it again," she said with younger frustration like Bruce had taught her. "I already did," Elena replied, sliding a business card toward me without theatrics. "Here is the lawyer who will represent you." She tapped the table twice. The sound was soft but exact, like gate closure. The myth protected her until it no longer served the truth. That evening, Austin sat across from me at the dining table. He opened his own folder. Inside was an insurance analysis. Not recent. Dad never had life insurance. I knew before he said it. Austin said Dad tried to get me to invest $55,000 into a failed company. Rachel stopped me. She saved my children's college fund, a smaller trap but same moral axis. He was drowning when he reached for you, I said softly. Reaching is not saving. Austin dropped his head into his palm. By not trusting him, I might have unknowingly protected us from losing even more. The silence in the room sat charged like a board hearing that never happened. His voice cracked on a real pause, then returned steadier. I reached for his hand. He let me hold it. At least one person in the Harper family did not let the myth eclipse the documents. A month later, Ruth called me. Not a creditor, not a lawyer, not an in-law. Just someone who recognized an older woman rebuilding in the quiet aftermath of another drowning case. Your voice has certainty, she said. You can build a legacy from certainty too, not just the numbers. She invited me to speak at her women's support circle, a circle of chairs and paper cups and tea where no husband's myth could overwrite the story. At the first circle meeting, 23 women listened, not hired actors, not shock consumers, real people needing to be believed. They asked, "How did you survive this?" I answered, I didn't survive by strength. I survived because I opened the ledger and let the paperwork speak. Every story has only one origin. Mine started with an envelope that had no warmth and ended with a truth that had no shame. I learned this in courtrooms of produce aisles and TPS filings. Denial protects a myth, never a victim. But paperwork protects whoever chooses to open it. And I chose to open it. I used to think fairness had a heartbeat. That justice could feel the pulse of a story. Then I walked into the courthouse and learned that paper doesn't have ears. The morning air in Pinecrest Valley was heavy with rain when I parked outside the county building. A gray rectangle of concrete, indifferent and efficient. Inside those walls, emotion had no currency. Only evidence did. Elena met me at the steps holding a folder thick enough to be a shield. Her eyes were steady. Her voice measured. Remember, she said the court doesn't care who taught you math. It cares who signed the papers. That sentence stayed in my chest like a small, steady weight. I nodded, clutching my leather satchel. Inside were copies of everything Bruce left behind, bank statements, forged signatures, and his final letter. In the week before the hearing, Elena had assembled a team. One of them was Jennifer Long, a financial investigator with soft speech and steel focus. She looked through Bruce's ledgers like an archaeologist decoding a vanished empire. Every Tuesday, she said, sliding a timeline toward me, he moved the same amounts through different channels. Classic circular transfers, meant to look legitimate. She pointed to a column. This account is in your name, but the handwriting isn't yours. Her calm made the horror easier to breathe. Each check, each form, another fingerprint of deceit. Jennifer's pencil traced numbers like autopsy cuts. Clean, necessary, undeniable. Austin sat beside me, pale and quiet. He had come to listen, not to talk. Rachel hadn't spoken since the day she saw her father's confession. Elena gathered every folder into a single binder. When she closed it, the sound felt final. "This will be a long fight," she said softly. "The bank will claim you benefited, that you knew even indirectly." I asked, "How long? Months? Maybe a year. But if we start right, we can finish with dignity." Dignity. That was a currency I could still afford. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and pine polish. Rows of benches lined the back wall. A seal hung above the judge's chair, gold against mahogany. I sat at the plaintiff's table. Across from me sat two lawyers from Republic Union Bank, crisp suits and confident smiles. They didn't look like villains. They looked like efficiency in human form. The judge entered gray-haired, deliberate. He didn't glance at either side. He only said, "Let's begin." Elena rose first. Her heels clicked once against the tile, the sound of certainty. Your Honor, she began, my client. Mrs. Nadine Harper is the victim of fraudulent financial manipulation conducted by her late husband with negligent oversight by the defendant bank. Her tone was precise. Each word landed like a stamp on cold paper. The opposing counsel objected, voice slick with confidence. Your Honor, this is an emotional framing. The husband is deceased. The bank followed standard procedure. The judge lifted a hand. Facts only, he said. And so began the hardest part, reducing my marriage to numbers. Jennifer took the stand first. She explained how Bruce had used internal transfer patterns that mirrored money laundering behavior. She showed charts color-coded factual. Every bar, every line, another slice of his double life. 17 accounts opened in Mrs. Harper's name, she said clearly. 19 credit cards, 3 home equity loans, all cross-collateralized. Combined debt, $260,000. My stomach clenched hearing it read aloud. Paper stripped of its warmth like bones, stripped of flesh. The bank's lawyer countered smoothly. Did the plaintiff ever object to these accounts while her husband was alive? Jennifer shook her head. She had no knowledge of them. Every signature was forged. Can you prove forgery? Yes, Jennifer said. The handwriting deviates from her natural sample by 14 measurable points. That's not error. That's intent. The courtroom fell silent. Even the clock seemed to hesitate between ticks. During recess, Rachel approached me in the hallway. Her face looked older than a month ago. Mom, she said quietly. I didn't want to believe it, but hearing it here, it's different. I nodded. She took my hand for the first time since the funeral. We'll finish what he started, she said, then corrected herself. No, we'll finish what he broke. That sentence felt like a hinge turning. For the first time, my daughter stood beside me, not in front of me. The bank's representative, a man named Mr. Callahan, took the stand next. He adjusted his tie before speaking. Our institution had no reason to suspect irregularities. Mr. Harper presented as a credible client for 37 years. Elena leaned forward slightly. 37 years of credibility built on forged documents. Did your staff ever verify secondary signatures? He hesitated, not after the initial setup, which was in 1986, she said. Correct. So your bank relied on a single verification older than your current teller staff. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence testified for him. The next witness was unexpected. Austin asked to speak. Elena looked at me. I nodded. He stood, hands clasped behind his back. Your Honor, he began, my father once tried to get me to invest $55,000 into a startup he said was a sure thing. Rachel stopped me. That company folded 3 months later. I believe now he was trying to patch debts we didn't know about. His words hung in the air, steady and sorrowful. The judge nodded once. Thank you, Mr. Harper. That context matters. When he sat down beside me, I felt a small warmth return to my chest. Not forgiveness, just alignment. By late afternoon, the judge called a brief recess. Elena leaned toward me, lowering her voice. They'll stall, she said. They'll hope you run out of energy or funds. That's how banks win. But they underestimate endurance. Her words steadied me. Endurance was something I understood. 37 years beside Bruce had trained me for long silences and longer patience. If they thought I would fold, they didn't know the woman who rebuilt libraries after floods, who cataloged chaos for a living. When court adjourned for the day, I walked out beneath the rain again. The sky hung low, the kind of gray that makes buildings blend into themselves. Elena handed me her umbrella. You're doing well, she said, but this fight will test everything you believe about fairness. I looked back at the courthouse doors. They were heavy carved oak, too large for any one person to move alone. I don't believe in fairness anymore, I said quietly. I believe in evidence. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile forged in long battles. Then you already understand the court. The rain kept falling soft but steady. I walked toward my car folder in hand shoes soaking through. For the first time since Bruce's death, I didn't feel small. The court didn't care who taught me math. It cared who had turned my trust into collateral, and I was finally ready to balance the equation. When the storm inside a courtroom ends, silence can feel dangerous. You start to mistake stillness for safety. But stillness is only another kind of waiting. It had been 6 weeks since the preliminary hearing. Elena worked quietly behind the scenes, gathering depositions and expert witnesses. I needed to keep moving or I would drown in the paperwork of memory. That was when Ruth Caldwell called me again. Her voice carried warmth and caffeine like sunlight through old curtains. I could use help at the shop, she said. Part-time mornings only. We could both use the company. I almost said no. Work had always been Bruce's territory measured in spreadsheets and commissions. But Ruth's offer sounded like an open window after months of stale air. So the next Monday, I went back to work. Not at a library this time, but at Caldwell's Book Nook, a small independent bookstore near the harbor. The bell above the door chimed when I entered. The scent of paper cedar and brewed coffee wrapped around me. Stacks of books leaned like sleepy towers, waiting for hands to wake them. Ruth looked up from the counter. She was 72, hair silver eyes sharp as a headline. Once a journalist, always an observer. "You're right on time," she said, sliding a box toward me. "Sort these by genre, memoir on the left, poetry on the back wall. Keep philosophy close to the window. It sells better there." I smiled. "Old habits die hard," I said. "Deadlines never do," she replied. There was rhythm in the work. The sound of pages, the scrape of boxes, the faint hum of the radio. It steadied me. After months of hearing only legal jargon and echoing corridors, this was the first sound that felt alive. At noon, Ruth poured tea and handed me a cup. "Working again suits you," she said. "Sometimes rebuilding begins with alphabetizing," I answered. A week later, Ruth stayed late after closing. She was typing on her old laptop fingers, moving fast. The screen's glow lit her face like a campfire. "What are you writing?" I asked. "Your story," she said simply. "I think people need to read about spousal financial abuse from someone real, not a statistic." I froze. "Ruth, I'm still in court. Won't that cause trouble?" She looked up, voice firm. "I won't print names, just patterns, and I'll make sure it goes through the Pinecrest Community Press, not a tabloid." I watched her type every keystroke, a small act of defiance. Her words weren't gossip. They were evidence translated into empathy. By Friday, the article went live under the headline, "When Love Signs the Loan, the Hidden Face of Financial Abuse." The story spread quietly. Readers shared it on local forums, book clubs, and church bulletins. People started leaving notes at the bookstore, some anonymous, some trembling with gratitude. One woman wrote, "I thought it was just me." Another said, "You gave my silence a name." I hadn't realized how many of us were trapped in the fine print of trust. The bookstore became a kind of confessional. Women came under the pretense of browsing, but their eyes told a different story. A retired nurse said her husband still controlled every account. A young mother whispered that her credit had been ruined by loans she never took. I listened, not as a victim, as someone who had already stared into the vault and survived it. Ruth began hosting a Saturday morning discussion called Ledger Talks. The first session drew 5 people. The second drew 20. By the 4th week, the local news station sent a reporter. They filmed the circle of chairs, the coffee cups, the quiet solidarity. The segment aired under the title, Voices of the Overlooked. The next morning, the courthouse lobby was full of people waiting, not spectators, supporters. Their presence changed something subtle but powerful. Justice systems fear publicity more than outrage. Suddenly, the case of Harper vs. Republic Union Bank was no longer a file buried in archives. It was a headline. One evening after closing, Ruth and I sat by the shop window. The harbor lights flickered in the distance, reflections trembling on wet glass. "You know," she said, "stirring her tea a job isn't a happy ending. It's a lighthouse. It doesn't move. It just stays lit until you find your way." I nodded slowly. Her words sank deep. For months I had seen work as an afterthought, a way to survive until the trial ended. But she was right. It was more than a paycheck. It was proof that I could still stand in the storm and not dissolve. That night, after locking up, I found a small envelope under the register. No return address. Inside was a single card with careful handwriting. It read, "Your husband's confession opened more than a case. It opened eyes. Keep telling the truth." There was no signature, just courage mailed back to me. I slipped it into my wallet beside Bruce's old photograph. One piece of paper, heavy with betrayal. Another light with hope. Balance restored, if only slightly. Elena called a week later. Her tone was both cautious and proud. The bank's legal team requested mediation. That means they're nervous. What made them change their mind, I asked. She laughed softly. Public opinion, and a well-written community article by a certain Ruth Caldwell. I smiled. Justice might not have a heartbeat, but sometimes it has a pulse after all. Elena continued, "Be ready. They'll offer settlement options, but we go in strong. The press is on your side now. Use it wisely." When the call ended, I looked around the shop. The shelves glowed under the soft evening light. Every title seemed to breathe again. For the first time since Bruce's death, I felt something close to peace. Not the fragile kind that hides from conflict, but the kind that rebuilds between chapters. Working beside Ruth reminded me of who I was before I became evidence, a woman who loved stories, who believed in the quiet power of language to repair what money destroyed. Each customer I helped, each book I shelved, was another small repair stitched into the torn fabric of my life. People think survival ends when the danger passes. It doesn't. Survival is what you build in the aftermath. One cup of tea, one headline, one act of truth at a time. When I closed the shop that night, the lighthouse at the end of the harbor blinked through fog. Its beam swept across the water and landed briefly on the bookstore window. The reflection caught my face, older but steadier. The storm was still out there, but I wasn't drifting anymore. A job is not an epilogue. It is the light that keeps you honest when everything else goes dark. And mine had just been turned back on. There is a special kind of silence that follows a public story. It hums louder than gossip and cuts deeper than pity. After Ruth's article, the community treated me like a symbol. Some whispered at the market. Others thanked me in parking lots. Both reactions made me tremble in different ways. I wasn't brave yet. I was just exposed. Our first support group met on a rainy Thursday evening in the back room of the bookstore. We pushed aside boxes of unsold calendars and carried in mismatched chairs. The air smelled of ink and dust and something new, courage maybe. Ruth placed a tray of paper cups on the table, each cup filled with weak coffee and strong expectation. When the women began to arrive, I felt my chest tighten. Some were younger than my daughter, others older than me. Different lives, same bruises, only theirs were made of numbers, not fists. Ruth introduced me quietly. "This is Nadine Harper," she said. "She knows what it means to lose everything and still stand up." I wanted to correct her to say my name felt like a costume I hadn't chosen, but I only nodded and smiled, hands trembling slightly. The women began sharing their stories. A teacher whose husband opened credit cards in her name, a widow whose son drained her savings under the promise of temporary help, a nurse fired after co-signing loans she never saw. Their words fell into the air like stones breaking ice. One by one, the surface cracked and the truth surfaced. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said the line that had lived in my throat for months. I thought love meant not asking questions. I was wrong. The room went still. Then someone whispered, "So was I." And just like that, we weren't strangers anymore. Week after week, the group grew. 10 women, then 15, then 20. They came from different neighborhoods, but all carried the same invisible ledger of loss. We didn't meet to cry, we met to rebuild. Ruth called it community accounting. Every week, someone shared a resource, a lawyer's contact, or a way to freeze fraudulent accounts. We brought laptops and notebooks and bank statements. The sound of typing became our new anthem. There was something revolutionary about women comparing interest rates instead of recipes. Ruth and I printed handouts about credit freezes, fraud alerts, and power of attorney limits. We taught each other how to reclaim names from systems that had erased us. I began to speak with more certainty each week, not as a victim, but as an advocate. Still, one truth kept haunting me. My last name wasn't mine, not really. It happened one night after everyone left. I stayed behind to clean up paper cups and wipe the table. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Ruth stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur through the downpour. "You look restless," she said. "I am," I admitted. "I keep saying my husband's last name like it's a chain." Ruth didn't look surprised. "Then take it off," she said simply. "Names are supposed to be signatures of choice, not scars of ownership." I stared at the empty chairs. They looked like quiet witnesses waiting for me to sign something invisible. "I used to be Nadine Sullivan," I said softly. Ruth turned to me and smiled. "Then she's overdue for a comeback." That night, I filled out the paperwork. At the top, in firm handwriting, I wrote, "When I sealed the envelope, I felt something uncoil in my chest. The woman I used to be had been buried under decades of joint signatures. Now she was breathing again." The next week, I told the group about my decision. The reaction was quiet but electric. Some clapped softly, others nodded, eyes shining. One woman said, "You gave us permission." I told her, "You never needed mine." We spent that evening talking about names, how they carried shame, history, and power. Each woman shared what she had been called and what she wanted to be called next. For some, the change was symbolic. For others, it was survival. Then came the harder truths. A woman confessed that her abuser still had access to her pension. Another admitted she still answered his calls because fear had a voice that sounded familiar. No one judged. We passed tissues and poured refills of lukewarm coffee. Healing, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet repetition. It's showing up even when your hands shake. By the end of the meeting, the rain had stopped. But inside, the sound of paper cups being stacked felt almost holy. A month later, my name change was approved. I stood at the county clerk's office holding the stamped certificate. The clerk, a woman about my age, smiled kindly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan." The name felt new and ancient at once, like putting on a coat that had been waiting in a closet for 37 years. Ruth hosted a small celebration that evening at the bookstore. No cake, no champagne. Just our circle, our coffee, and our truth. She handed me a new name tag for the next meeting. White background, black letters. When I pinned it to my sweater, the group applauded. It wasn't loud, but it was pure. At the end of the night, I stood and spoke. My voice didn't tremble this time. I used to think survival was the end of the story I said. But it's not. Survival is the middle. Dignity is the ending we write ourselves. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then the applause came slow, steady, not for the performance, but for the shared recognition. I looked around the circle. Ruth, the journalist who turned pain into headlines. Clara, the nurse, rebuilding her credit. Monica, the teacher, fighting for her pension. Each woman holding her own version of courage. And I realized something. Bruce's legacy wasn't the debt he left. It was the proof that dignity can survive even under forged signatures. When the group dispersed, I stepped outside. The bookstore lights spilled onto the wet sidewalk, reflecting off puddles like small mirrors. The harbor lighthouse flickered again in the distance, steady and patient. Ruth locked the door beside me. "You know," she said, "every woman who walks in there leaves a little stronger." "Because of you," I said. She shook her head. "No, because of truth. It's contagious when spoken out loud." I looked down at the certificate in my hand. Nadine Sullivan. Not a widow, not a victim. Just a woman with her own name and her own ledger of life. The night wind brushed against my face, cool and salt-scented. I breathed deeply and felt something I hadn't in years: freedom without apology. The next morning, I replaced the nameplate on my mailbox. It read simply, Sullivan. The mailman paused, smiled, and said, "New start." I nodded. "Not new," I said quietly. "Recovered." There are rooms where truth has no temperature. Courtrooms are one of them. The air inside the Pinecrest County Courthouse was cold enough to keep emotions from rising. You could feel justice trying to stay sterile. I sat at the same wooden table as before. The grain beneath my fingertips felt smooth from use, like old leather. Beside me, Elena arranged her folders into color-coded stacks: yellow for exhibits, blue for bank records, red for testimony. Across from us, the bank's legal team whispered among themselves. 3 suits, same posture, same polished calm. They looked at me the way accountants look at an error they plan to erase. The judge entered. He was 63, gray hair, neatly combed glasses resting halfway down his nose. He didn't smile, but his eyes held the kind of patience earned from decades of listening to broken truths. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, glancing at the file, "I understand this case involves contested liability arising from financial misconduct by your late husband." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "My name is Nadine Sullivan." I spoke it firmly, letting the syllables settle in the air like ownership. The bank's lawyer began with a tone that dripped courtesy. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mrs. Sullivan, the debts in question provided marital benefits. Under the principle of spousal equity, liability should remain." He paused for effect, letting the word liability hang like a verdict. He continued, "She lived in the house financed through those loans. She benefited from the equity. Therefore, she bears responsibility." Elena rose calmly. Her presence changed the rhythm of the room. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about marital benefit. It is about forgery, fraud, and institutional negligence." She held up the binder we'd built together. "This evidence follows a 3-axis ladder handwriting routing and account divergence." Her voice sharpened. "Each axis proves the plaintiff's non-involvement beyond doubt." Elena motioned toward the handwriting expert, Dr. Louise Granger, a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. She approached the stand holding 2 blown-up signatures, one mine, one Bruce's imitation. "Your Honor." She began. "The signature on the loan documents deviates from Mrs. Sullivan's natural stroke pattern by 14 measurable points. The slant pressure and rhythm all belong to a different hand." The judge leaned forward. "You're certain beyond statistical coincidence," Dr. Granger replied. She pointed to the page. "The forged version hesitates mid-stroke. Mrs. Sullivan's does not. This is the handwriting of a man masking guilt, not a woman granting consent." I sat still, breathing through the sting of those words. It was strange hearing your pain analyzed like geometry. Next came Jennifer Long, the investigator. She took the stand with quiet precision. "Your Honor, each of the 3 loans was deposited into accounts exclusively in Mr. Harper's name. The routing numbers confirm isolation from the plaintiff's accounts." She flipped through the charts. Her laser pointer traced clean red lines from bank to bank. "These funds bypassed every shared account," she said. "Even tax returns omit the interest payments. This is financial concealment, not marital partnership." The bank's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. He muttered, "Those accounts may still have benefited household stability." Jennifer didn't even glance his way. Stability bought on deception is not a legal benefit. It is theft wearing a wedding ring. Finally, Elena turned to the last piece of evidence. "The divergence analysis," she said, "shows that Mr. Harper systematically used his professional access to create false transfers. He rerouted money under the guise of investment recovery." She tapped the document. "This chart shows when the deception began 5 years before his death and when it ended the day he collapsed at work." The courtroom grew still. Even the clock seemed to pause. I could feel my pulse steady, not from anger anymore, but from confirmation. For years, Bruce had told me not to worry about the boring money stuff. Now every ledger line proved why he needed my silence. The bank's attorney tried one last defense. Your Honor, while forgery may be evident, we maintain that Mrs. Sullivan benefited indirectly from the marital estate. She lived in the home improved by these funds. Elena stood again. Her tone was ice wrapped in velvet. She lived in a home she helped build 40 years ago, she said. She tended that home, maintained it paid bills from her income. What her husband did was not an improvement. It was erosion masked as loyalty. She stepped closer to the bench. The court must decide whether marriage licenses fraud or whether law protects the innocent. Her words landed like stones into still water. The judge raised a hand. I've heard enough. Minutes passed in silence as the judge reviewed his notes. Finally, he looked up. I have considered the arguments, he began. Voice calm, unhurried. The evidence presented through handwriting routing and account divergence is compelling. The court finds that the plaintiff, Mrs. Sullivan, had no knowledge of nor participation in the fraudulent loans. He glanced toward the bank's lawyers. The presumption of marital benefit cannot override clear proof of deception. Then he turned back to me. The loans are hereby void. The property lien is released. The plaintiff's separate assets, including the trapped $400,000 in retirement holdings, are preserved. My breath caught. It was not victory I felt. It was release a door unlocking after years of being mistaken for a wall. Elena placed a gentle hand on mine. You did it, she whispered. I shook my head. We did. Outside, the afternoon light fell soft through courthouse windows. Rachel and Austin were waiting at the steps. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Rachel hugged me tightly. Her voice cracked when she said Dad taught me numbers. You taught me what they mean. Austin smiled faintly. Let's go home, Mom. Home. Not the house Bruce mortgaged into ashes, but the space we rebuilt from truth. That evening I sat at my kitchen table again. No files, no fear, just a cup of tea, and the final court order folded beside it. I thought of the judge's words, liability void release. 3 words that had once belonged to law now belonged to healing. Liability meant facing what wasn't mine but carried my name. Void meant letting go of debts that weren't love. Release meant reclaiming the life that still was. Outside the harbor, light blinked through the fog, steady as ever. For the first time, its rhythm matched my own. I wasn't exonerated by mercy. I was freed by proof. And that, I realized, is the quietest kind of justice, when truth no longer needs to raise its voice. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old air when I walked out for the last time, but the air outside was lighter, almost salt-sweet, as if the sea itself exhaled with me. For the first time in years, my steps felt unchained. The next morning, I stood inside North Harbor Community Bank, a modest building with brass handles and soft blue walls. It wasn't the grand marble lobby Bruce once favored, but it felt human. A woman behind the counter smiled and said, "Good morning, ma'am. How can we help you today?" I took a breath. "I'd like to open a new account," I said, in my own name. She handed me the form. Under account holder, I wrote Nadine Sullivan in steady script. No hesitation, no shared ownership box checked, just me. When she asked for my identification, I passed her the court order and name certificate. She read them carefully, then looked up with quiet admiration. "Congratulations," she said. "Fresh start." "Not fresh," I replied. "Just fair." She smiled again and offered me a new debit card still wrapped in plastic. The card shimmered under the light, clean, untouched mine. As she printed the account confirmation, she said softly, "We're small, but we care. You'll like it here." And I did. Because here, my balance started at 0, but my dignity was fully restored. I began volunteering twice a week at the Harbor Women's Resource Center, right across from the courthouse. Elena had introduced me after the trial. The director, a former paralegal named Marta, welcomed me with open arms. "You know what survival looks like," she said. "We need women like you to show others they're not crazy, just deceived." My first session felt strange. I wasn't used to speaking as an expert. But when I saw the fear in those women's eyes, I recognized my old reflection. I told them how control often hides behind politeness. How don't worry about it. Honey can be the first step to erasure. How every joint account should come with joint access, not joint silence. They listened, took notes, and then slowly started sharing their own stories. By the end of the hour, we weren't victims in recovery. We were auditors of our own lives. Ruth visited the bookstore that weekend with a copy of the North Harbor Chronicle. She placed it on the counter, folded to the second page. The headline read, "Beneath it." My photograph, gray-haired, upright, unsmiling, accompanied the quote, "Silence protects the abuser more than the marriage." I stared at it for a long time, not out of vanity but disbelief. Once I had been a woman who thought privacy was virtue. Now I understood that transparency was defense. Ruth laughed gently. "You didn't ask to be a symbol, but you became one anyway. Symbols fade," I said. "Systems change slower. That's where I'll work." A month later, I organized my first financial awareness workshop at the community hall. We called it The Ledger Lives On. 25 women showed up, each carrying folders, receipts, and unspoken shame. We began with simple questions. Do you know every password? Do you receive every statement? Most said no. Some said they didn't want to upset their husbands by asking. I told them gently, asking isn't confrontation. It's confirmation. We taught budgeting, fraud detection, and credit recovery. Elena gave a talk about legal recourse for forged signatures. Marta shared a checklist for financial independence. When the workshop ended, one woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "My husband controls everything." I thought it was love. I touched her arm and said, "So did I." But love doesn't hide bank accounts. 2 months after the verdict, I replaced the rusted gate outside my home. It was something Bruce had always postponed, claiming the expense was unnecessary. Now I chose the design myself, simple iron bars painted deep blue, the same shade as the old ledger's cover. When the contractor finished, he handed me the new keys. The metal felt cool, reassuring. He asked what I wanted engraved on the nameplate. "Just Sullivan," I said. "No prefixes, no suffixes, no ghosts." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the harbor, I stood before the gate with Rachel and Austin. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but calmer too. Rachel brushed a tear away. "It's beautiful, Mom. It's honest," I said. Then I locked it, not to keep people out, but to remind myself who belonged within. By autumn, the workshops became monthly gatherings. Local banks began attending, listening to survivor testimonies. The North Harbor Community Bank even introduced a policy requiring dual verification for joint accounts. They called it the Sullivan Clause. When I heard that, I almost laughed. Bruce had once believed control was a sign of intelligence. Now my insistence on fairness had become a policy. Rachel helped me set up a small foundation. We named it Tomorrow Tidy, a nod to Bruce's old phrase repurposed with truth. The mission was simple: protect women from quiet financial abuse. We partnered with accountants, legal firms, and therapists. We created educational videos, pamphlets, and hotline numbers. And every month I stood at the podium of that little community hall reminding people that dignity has a balance sheet too. Healing didn't come overnight. I still found letters in drawers written in Bruce's precise hand. Sometimes I even missed the man I thought I married, the one who laughed at breakfast and balanced the checkbook like a ritual. But grief and clarity can share the same room. I learned to mourn the love that wasn't honest and to honor the honesty that survived. One night, while locking the bookstore, Ruth handed me a mug of tea. "Do you ever regret exposing him?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said, "because if I hadn't, I'd still be living in his math instead of my truth." The next spring, the city invited me to speak at a financial ethics seminar for university students. Standing at the podium, I looked at the rows of young faces, future bankers, accountants, auditors. I told them integrity isn't a subject you graduate from. It's one you renew daily. They clapped politely, but a few leaned forward, listening with real weight. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "My dad's an accountant, too," she said. Sometimes I think he hides things from my mom. What should I do? I smiled softly. Start by telling the truth to yourself. The rest follows. That evening, I returned home and poured tea into a chipped blue mug the same color as the old ledger. I took it outside to the porch and watched the lighthouse beams sweep across the harbor. I thought of my journey, not a tale of revenge, but of reclamation, of how truth, when finally spoken, doesn't destroy, it disinfects. My new bank card lay on the table beside me, next to a small silver keychain engraved with my initials, NS new name. New gate, same strength. When the lighthouse light swept across my face again, I whispered the words that had changed everything, keeping our tomorrow tidy. Then I smiled and added quietly, this time I mean it. I once thought security sounded like numbers whispered between spouses. Now I know security sounds like honesty spoken out loud. If this story resonated, remember this. A job is a lighthouse. A new gate can still open at any age. Quiet financial abuse thrives in silence. Truth is the only audit it cannot survive. We rebuilt with folder copies, paper cups, and hard conversations around chairs that didn't match at first. Strength does not roar. It shows up early, brewed lightly, spoken plainly, and repeated until it becomes policy. If someone near you controls the boring money stuff, check gently, check, directly, check, safely. If you ever feel split in two by a normal day, don't assume the fracture is yours to carry alone. Leave a comment. Tell me your city. Join this growing circle of listeners who believe it's never too late to reclaim dignity, and let the paperwork speak.